Ingrid Halvorsen buried her husband on a Monday in March 1868 on a hillside overlooking the valley where they'd planned to build their life together, where they'd talked about growing old, about raising children, about creating something permanent in this temporary American wilderness. Lars had been dead 3 days when they found him in the collapsed mine shaft 40 feet below ground, still holding the timber brace he'd been trying to install when the ceiling came down. When the owner's negligence finally killed someone, when shortcuts and cost-cutting became manslaughter, they brought his body up in pieces, not literally, but broken, crushed. His face was untouched, almost peaceful, but his chest and abdomen were destroyed by the falling rock. Ingrid had identified him by his wedding ring, by the scar on his left hand from a childhood accident in Bergen, by the way his hair curled at the temples, by everything except his eyes, which were closed, which wouldn't open again, which would never again look at her with that particular combination of love and mischief that had made her cross an ocean to be with him. The mining company gave her $40, compensation for a life, blood money, and apology for the structural failure that everyone knew was coming, that everyone had warned management about multiple times, that management had ignored because proper shoring cost money and dead miners were cheaper than adequate timber and safety protocols. The mine supervisor, a man named Carson, who'd refused Lars's requests for better materials, handed her the money with eyes that wouldn't meet hers. Company regrets this tragedy, offers its condolences. $40 should help you resettle. $40, Ingrid had said, her Norwegian accent thick with grief and rage. My husband's life, $40 American. In Norway, blood debt is measured differently. This ain't Norway, ma'am. No. In Norway, men who kill through negligence face justice. Here they offer $40 and call it settled. Carson had left quickly, and Ingrid had stood there with the money in her hand, blood money that smelled like copper and shame, and she'd wanted to throw it in his face, wanted to refuse it entirely, wanted to do something that would hurt the company the way they'd hurt her. But she had Olaf, 3 years old, Lars's son, her son, a child who needed food and shelter, and a mother who functioned despite wanting to scream until her throat bled. So she took the money, took the $40 of blood and negligence, added it to the $80 she and Lars had saved over 2 years of his dangerous work. $120 total, their entire fortune, their American dream reduced to coins and paper. She took Olaf to Lars's grave on the hillside, held his small hand while she tried to explain death to someone too young to understand permanence. "Papa's sleeping?" Olaf asked in Norwegian, looking at the fresh dirt. "No, min kjære, not sleeping. Papa has gone somewhere we cannot follow, not yet. When will he come back?" "He won't come back, Olaf. He's gone to be with God now. But he loved you very much, loves you still, I think, even from where he is." Olaf was quiet for a long time, processing what his 3-year-old mind could grasp. "I want Papa. I know, I want him too, want him so much it hurts to breathe." The valley had 15 houses, all built the same way. American style, wood frame, pitched roofs, simple, fast. Adequate for most purposes. The families were kind enough. In that distant way, frontier people showed kindness. They brought food, offered condolences, suggested gently that a young widow with a small child might want to return to Norway, or at least move to Helena, where a woman alone might find work and community. Ingrid thanked them, took the food, ignored the advice. She had $40 from the mining company and $80 she and Lars had saved. $120 total. Enough to build something if she built smart, if she built Norwegian. "See that hillside?" she told Olaf in Norwegian, holding his small hand as they stood at Lars's grave. "Your papa and I, we chose this land because of that hill. Most people build in the valley, flat, easy, American thinking. But your papa, he was smart. He said the hill was protection, said building into the hill was how smart people survived Montana winters." Olaf looked up at her with blue eyes that were pure Lars. "Papa's in the ground now." "Yes, and we will honor him by building what he dreamed, a house in the hillside, like in Norway, like your grandparents had, a house that uses the earth for protection instead of fighting against it." She started 2 days later, because waiting would mean thinking, and thinking would mean drowning in grief that had no bottom. Not in the valley where everyone else built, where flat land made construction easy, where American methods said proper houses belonged. On the hillside, 50 feet up the slope, where the hill angled steeply at about 30 degrees, where everyone said was dangerous, unstable, prone to landslide, where building seemed not just difficult, but actively insane. But Ingrid knew hillsides, had grown up in Bergen, where entire neighborhoods clung to slopes steeper than this, where turf houses had lasted 300 years without sliding, without collapsing, without killing anyone. Montana wasn't so different from Norway. Cold winters, heavy snow, mountains. If Norwegian engineering worked there, it would work here. She bought a shovel, a pick, and timber for framing, spent $12 of her precious $120. Then she climbed the hillside with Olaf and began digging into the earth that would become their home. The physical labor was brutal in ways she hadn't anticipated. Ingrid was strong from farm work in Norway, from years of hauling water and chopping wood and doing the endless physical tasks that frontier life demanded. But this was different. This was excavating a hillside alone, using tools meant for 2 people, while a 3-year-old played nearby with wooden blocks because she had no one to watch him while she worked. She dug at an angle, following the slope's natural contour, creating a room that would be half excavated into the hill. The back wall would be pure earth, held back by timber framing. The side walls would be part earth, part timber. Only the front would be fully exposed to weather. The soil was rocky, dense. Every shovelful felt like lifting stones. Her hands blistered within the first hour, then the blisters tore, then her palms bled, then they calloused over the blood, and she kept digging because stopping meant thinking about Lars being dead and how she was doing this alone when they were supposed to do it together. Olaf helped in the way 3-year-olds help, moved pebbles from one pile to another, sang Norwegian songs his father had taught him, asked when Papa was coming home, then remembered, then cried, then forgot again. The digging took 6 weeks, 6 weeks of dawn to dark labor, 6 weeks of moving earth bucket by bucket, creating a space 12 feet deep into the hillside, 16 feet wide, 8 feet tall at the front, tapering to 6 feet at the back where hill and ceiling met. She lined the excavated space with timber she bought from the sawmill, spending another $18. Created a frame that held back the earth, that prevented collapse, that transformed a hole in a hill into the skeleton of a structure. Then came the sod work, the technique Lars had described from his childhood in Norway, the method his grandmother had used, that her grandmother had used, that stretched back centuries in Norwegian building tradition. She cut sod bricks from the prairie below. Each brick was roughly 2 feet long, 1 foot wide, 6 inches thick. Cut from areas where prairie grass grew thick, where roots formed a dense mat that held the soil together. Each brick weighed about 40 pounds. She needed 600 bricks for the front wall alone. That was 24,000 pounds of sod she had to cut, carry up the hillside, and stack like masonry. It took her 4 weeks. 4 weeks of cutting sod in the morning, hauling it up the slope in afternoon, stacking it in evening. Her back never stopped aching. Her shoulders burned constantly, but the wall grew solid and thick, 2 feet of earth and roots and grass that would stop wind, hold heat, last for decades. But Ingrid understood something they didn't. She understood Norwegian turf houses, understood that in Bergen and Trondheim and 1,000 villages across Norway, people had built into hillsides for centuries, used the earth as insulation, the slope as protection, built with the land instead of on top of it. She dug into the hillside at an angle, creating a room that would be half buried in the hill. The back wall would be earth, the side walls would be earth and timber, only the front would be exposed. 3 walls of insulation, 1 wall facing south for light and access. The digging took 6 weeks, 6 weeks of moving earth bucket by bucket, 6 weeks of Olaf helping with his small wooden shovel, thinking it was a game, not understanding his mother was building their survival. She lined the excavated room with timber she bought from the sawmill, creating a frame that held back the earth. Then she built the exposed front wall using sod bricks, not wood. Sod. Chunks of prairie grass and roots cut into blocks, stacked like masonry, creating a wall 2 feet thick that was more earth than plant. For the roof, she used the Norwegian technique Lars had described from his childhood. Birch bark first, for waterproofing. Then a layer of earth. Then sod chunks with grass side up, living roof. The grass would grow, the roots would knit together, creating a waterproof layer that got stronger over time, that held heat in winter and stayed cool in summer. The house was small, 1 room, 12 feet by 16 feet, low ceiling, minimal windows. It looked more like a small hill with a door than a proper house. People came to watch, fascinated by the strangeness of it. "It's a cave," Martha Henderson said to her husband. Both of them stopped on the trail to stare. "She's building a cave for her and that poor child. It's not natural, not civilized." "Turf house," Ingrid corrected from inside the excavation. "Traditional Norwegian. 600 years old, the technique. Older, maybe. But it's in the hillside. What if the hill collapses? What if it slides in heavy rain? You're putting yourself and that child in terrible danger. The hill has been here 10,000 years. It will not collapse now because I dig small room. You don't know that. Montana has different weather than Norway, different soil. This could all come down on your head." Ingrid straightened from her work, looked at Martha directly. "In valley, when big snow comes, where does it go? Stays on flat ground. Buries houses. On hillside, snow slides down, keeps moving, never buries. Physics, not faith. That's not how it works. Snow falls everywhere, including on hillsides. Yes, and on hillside it does not stay. It falls down to valley, where your houses are." Martha left unsettled. The Norwegian woman's logic was strange, foreign, probably wrong, but stated with such certainty it was hard to dismiss entirely. The settlement started calling it the widow's burrow, the cave house, the hill tomb where the Norwegian woman was going to kill herself and her child through stubbornness and ignorance of American building methods. Ingrid heard the talk and kept building. She sealed the sod walls with clay mixed with straw, installed a small door made from scrap lumber, created 2 small windows using oiled paper since glass was too expensive, built a stone fireplace that vented through a chimney disguised as a rock outcropping, so from distance the house looked like natural hillside with a small cave entrance. By October it was finished. A house built into the hill. From the valley you could barely see it. Just a door and 2 windows in what looked like a natural slope. From above it looked like a grassy hill with a small flat spot. She moved in with Olaf. The interior was dark but warm. The 3 walls of earth held constant temperature. The turf roof shed rain perfectly. The exposed front wall, 2 feet of sod and earth, stopped wind completely. It was perfect. Exactly what Lars had dreamed of. Exactly what Norwegian settlers had been building for centuries in climates harsher than Montana. But the settlement didn't see perfection. They saw a woman living in a hill, like an animal. They saw a child being raised in a cave. They saw someone who didn't understand that American methods were superior, that building in valleys was proper, that hillsides were dangerous. "Someone should report her," Ingrid overheard one woman say at the general store. "That child shouldn't be raised in a hole in the ground. It's not right, not Christian." Ingrid bought her supplies and left. Let them think what they wanted. She had shelter, warmth, safety. That was enough. The test came on January 7th, 1869, arriving with the particular malice that Montana winter specialized in, the kind of weather event that becomes legend, that gets recorded in territorial records, that people measure future storms against for generations. The storm that Montana historical records would later call the burial winter, though it wasn't winter itself that did the burying. It was snow. 6 feet of it in 36 hours, then avalanche that made the snow look gentle by comparison. It started at dawn with deceptive calm. Clear sky, cold but manageable. -10 degrees. Ingrid made breakfast, fed Olaf, checked her firewood supply. Everything routine, everything normal. Then around 9 a.m. the temperature began to drop. Not gradually, precipitously. -10 became -20 in an hour. -20 became -30 by 11. The air itself felt different, thicker, weighted with pressure that made ears pop and breath hurt. Wind building from the north around noon, steady and purposeful and impossibly cold. Not gusting, not variable, just constant increasing pressure from the Arctic pushing south with nothing to slow it across 1,000 miles of empty Canadian prairie. Snow beginning to fall around 1 p.m., not flakes, chunks, pieces of ice the size of quarters, falling so thick they erased the world within minutes. Visibility dropped from miles to yards to feet to nothing. White became everything. Sound became muffled. The valley below disappeared entirely. By 3 p.m., there was 2 feet of snow on level ground, and it was still falling with increasing intensity. By 6 p.m., 4 feet, drifting to 8, where wind pushed accumulation against obstacles. By midnight, 6 feet of base with drifts reaching 14 feet in places. The houses in the valley began disappearing, swallowed by accumulation that was happening faster than anyone had thought possible, faster than structural design could accommodate. Peaked roofs that were meant to shed snow began collecting it instead, because it fell too fast to slide, because it compacted under its own weight, because 6 feet of snow weighs approximately 3,600 pounds, and most residential roofs weren't built to hold that much. Windows were buried first, then doors, then eaves, then chimneys. 15 houses gradually entombed by falling snow that showed no signs of stopping, that kept falling hour after hour with mechanical precision, like the sky had opened a door and was emptying its entire contents on Montana territory. Up on the hillside, Ingrid's turf house behaved exactly as Norwegian physics and centuries of winter experience predicted. Snow hit the steep slope and slid down immediately. Some accumulated, yes, but not much. The pitch of the hill was too steep for snow to pile. The living turf roof was too slick, too slanted. Snow landed and immediately began sliding toward the valley below, following gravity, doing what snow always did on slopes, if the angle was right. Inside, Ingrid and Olaf were warm and safe. 48 degrees inside, while -30 outside. The 3 walls of earth held geothermal warmth that human-built walls could never match. The sod front wall, 2 feet of packed earth and roots, stopped wind that was testing every structure's weakest points. The small fireplace required minimal wood to maintain comfort because the house itself was insulation. "Mama, why is it so loud?" Olaf asked, listening to wind howl outside. "Storm, min käre, big storm, but we are safe here. The hill protects us." Around 3 a.m. on the second night, the avalanche came. The storm had loaded the mountain slopes above the valley with unstable snow, too much weight, too steep. The whole slope let go at once, millions of tons of snow sliding downhill, moving at 60 miles per hour, burying everything in its path. Ingrid heard it coming, a sound like continuous thunder. She grabbed Olaf, held him close, waited. The avalanche hit the valley, buried the 15 houses completely, added another 10 feet of snow on top of the 6 feet already there. Some houses collapsed immediately, others held, but were completely entombed. families trapped in darkness under 16 feet of compacted snow. Ingrid's hillside house was above the avalanche path. The snow river flowed past below, following the valley floor where all the conventional houses stood. Her position 50 feet up the slope meant she was in the safe zone, watching disaster from safety. When the sound stopped, when the avalanche finished its terrible work, Ingrid bundled Olaf in every warm thing they owned and stepped outside. The valley was gone, completely transformed. Where 15 houses had stood, there was now just a smooth white slope of compacted avalanche debris. No houses visible, no chimneys, nothing but snow. "Dear God," Ingrid whispered in Norwegian, "they're buried. Everyone is buried." She looked at her hillside house, barely touched by the storm. Snow had slid past it, around it, below it. The turf roof had shed accumulation perfectly. The sod walls had stopped wind. The position on the slope had placed them above the avalanche path. Lars's dream had worked. Norwegian engineering had worked. Building into the hillside had saved them, while building in the valley had buried everyone else. Ingrid strapped on makeshift snowshoes Lars had made 2 winters ago, took a shovel, told Olaf to stay inside and stay warm. "Where are you going, Mama?" "To dig people out. They're trapped." "But they said you were wrong, said our house was dangerous." "Yes, they did. But there's still people who need help." She spent the next 18 hours digging, driven by something beyond physical capacity, beyond what one woman should be able to do, powered by grief and Norwegian stubbornness, and the knowledge that Lars would have done this for anyone. So she had to do it for everyone. Found the Henderson house first by locating their chimney pipe sticking 6 inches above the compacted avalanche debris like a grave marker. Dug down through snow that had been compressed by the avalanche's force into something almost like ice. Not soft powder, solid mass. Every shovelful required 2 hands and full body weight. 8 feet down, she hit their roof. Shingles cracked and crushed. Another foot of digging to reach the peak. Then carefully breaking through without collapsing what remained, creating a hole, calling down. "Hello, Henderson family, can you hear me?" Silence. Then a child's voice, faint, muffled. "Help us, please help us." Martha Henderson's voice, desperate. "We're alive. Can't breathe well. Air is bad. Please hurry." Ingrid dug faster, widened the hole, got it large enough to climb through. Descended into darkness that smelled like fear and carbon monoxide, and the early stages of suffocation. The Henderson family. John, Martha, 4 children, ranging from 4 to 12. Huddled in what used to be their parlor, faces pale, breathing shallow. The youngest barely conscious. Their stove had been burning, consuming oxygen, producing carbon monoxide that had nowhere to vent because the chimney was blocked by snow. "Out! Now! Before you all die from bad air." She helped them climb through the hole she'd made, got them into fresh air, into killing cold, but at least clean cold, air that had oxygen instead of poison, sent them stumbling toward her hillside house. Then she moved to the next buried structure, the Brennan house. Thomas Brennan, who'd warned her about building in the hillside, who'd said she was endangering herself. His family trapped under 16 feet of compacted snow. She dug for 3 hours, found their chimney, dug down, broke through, found them conscious but hypothermic, huddled together for warmth, their inadequate fire having gone out hours ago when they ran out of accessible firewood. The Larson house, the Schmidt house, the Peterson house, each one a separate excavation, each one taking hours, each one revealing families trapped in darkness, running out of air, freezing slowly, waiting for death or rescue. Some houses had collapsed completely under the weight. Roofs caved in, walls buckled. These were the hardest, because she had to dig carefully, had to avoid causing further collapse, had to work around broken timbers and shifted structures. By dawn of the second day after the avalanche, she'd located all 15 buried houses. 14 families survived, pulled from tombs that would have killed them within hours. One family didn't make it. The Johnsons, mother, father, 2 children, found dead from carbon monoxide poisoning, their stove having filled the sealed space with poison while they slept, never knowing they were dying, never having a chance to escape. Ingrid sat in the snow outside the Johnson house after confirming they were dead, and she cried for the first time since Lars died, cried for this family she'd tried to save but reached too late, cried for her dead husband, cried for herself, digging alone through hell, trying to undo an avalanche with a shovel. Then she stood up, wiped her eyes, moved to the next house, because 14 families were still alive and needed help getting to safety. The survivors looked at Ingrid differently now. This Norwegian woman who they'd said didn't understand Montana, who they'd said was endangering herself building into a hillside, who they'd called wrong about everything. She'd been right. Catastrophically, obviously right. Her hillside turf house had survived unscathed, while every valley house had been buried. Her Norwegian physics had predicted exactly what happened. Her dangerous position on the slope had been the only safe location. Thomas Brennan, his house destroyed, his family traumatized, came to Ingrid 3 days after the avalanche. Mrs. Halvorson, I owe you an apology, and my life. You saved us, and you were right about everything. I was right about Norwegian building techniques, about hillside physics, but wrong about American kindness. You have all been kind to widow and child. Even when you thought I was foolish, you weren't foolish, we were, building in a valley beneath avalanche slopes, not understanding that flat ground is a trap when snow slides. You understood what we didn't. Lars understood. He dreamed this house. I just built what he saw. Will you teach us how to build like you built, so this doesn't happen again? Ingrid looked at the valley, at the destroyed houses, at the families living in her small turf house while their own homes were unusable. 14 families plus her and Olaf crowded into a space meant for 2. Impossibly tight, but everyone warm, everyone safe. I will teach, but you must listen to different ideas. Must accept that American way is not only way. Must be willing to look foolish building Norwegian in Montana. After this, nobody will call Norwegian methods foolish again. They rebuilt that spring, not in the valley floor. On the hillside, 7 families built hillside turf houses using Ingrid's design. 8 families built conventional houses, but on elevated ground, out of the avalanche path, positioned where physics and Norwegian experience said was safe. Ingrid helped design each house, showed them Norwegian techniques for cutting sod bricks, for waterproofing turf roofs, for making earth walls that held warmth. Some builders modified the design for American materials, others followed her instructions exactly. By winter of 1869, the settlement had 22 houses, none in the valley floor, all positioned safely, none buried when the next big storm came. Ingrid Halvorson lived in her hillside turf house for 34 years, raised Olaf there, watched him grow, marry, build his own hillside house nearby, became known throughout Montana Territory as the widow who understood snow, who'd saved a settlement through Norwegian stubbornness and dead husband's dream. She died in 1902, at age 59. Her obituary in the Helena Independent mentioned her contributions to avalanche safety, her introduction of Norwegian turf house construction to Montana, her work teaching settlers about hillside physics and snow behavior. It didn't mention that people had called her foolish, that they'd said she endangered her child, that they'd believed she was wrong about everything. It just mentioned survival and teaching, and the simple fact that sometimes wisdom comes from small countries far away, carried by widows who refuse to accept that their dead husband's dreams should die with him. The original turf house stood until 1947, when Olaf's grandson finally tore it down to build modern construction. By then, it was 179 years old, the turf roof still intact, the earthen walls still solid, proof that Norwegian engineering could outlast American skepticism by more than a century. But before demolition, engineers from Montana State University surveyed it, documented the construction, studied the techniques, published papers about earth-insulated hillside structures, about living roofs, about building with slopes instead of against them. They found that internal temperature had maintained 45 to 55 degrees year-round with minimal heating, that the position on the slope had protected it from 4 major avalanches over 79 years. That every measurement confirmed what Ingrid had known from the start. Building into hillsides wasn't dangerous. Building in valleys beneath them was. There's a historical marker on the hillside now, small bronze plaque that says, Site of Halvorsen Turf House, built 1868 by Ingrid Halvorsen using Norwegian hillside construction techniques. Survived burial winter avalanche 1869 while valley houses were destroyed. Example of immigrant engineering excellence saving American settlement. It doesn't mention Lars, though Ingrid would have wanted it to. Doesn't mention that the house was his dream before it was her reality. But on the anniversary of the avalanche, someone always puts flowers on the hillside where the turf house stood. Wild flowers in summer, dried flowers in winter, placed quietly by people who remember or whose grandparents remembered that sometimes the crazy ideas are the only sane ones. And sometimes the widow living in a hill knows more than everyone else combined.